42 shots, 0 goals. That's not a hockey score. That's an autopsy finding. The Pittsburgh Penguins weren't humiliated. They didn't quit, and they didn't get skated out of the building by the Flyers. That would have been cleaner. The Penguins went out in the cruelest way possible. One shot from forcing Game 7, just a bounce from dragging the thing back to Pittsburgh. Just one finish away from making Philly remember every horrible thought a team can have after blowing a 3-0 series lead. Instead, Dan Vladar stopped everything. Cam York found the one shot that counted, and Pittsburgh's season ended in overtime, 1-0 in Game 6. Welcome to the postmortem. Tonight's patient is the Pittsburgh Penguins. Cause of death, terminal scoring failure. Contributing factors, early series deficit, dead power play, old core dependency. Dan Vladar stopped everything, and one final overtime shift where the legs emptied out before the season did. And this one's brutal because the body was still warm. This wasn't some corpse dragged into the room 3 weeks late. Pittsburgh was alive, annoyingly live, if you're the Flyers. The Pens were down 3-0 in the series, which usually means the obituary's already written and the family's out just picking fonts. Then Pittsburgh won Game 4. Then they won Game 5. Suddenly the Flyers, who had every right to feel comfortable, had to look across the ice and see Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, and Chris Letang in a franchise that has spent 2 decades treating death like a scheduling inconvenience. And that was Pittsburgh's false hope. In a postmortem, false hope matters because when you get swept, there is no mystery. You're bad. You're outclassed. You're removed like a typo. But when you claw back from 3-0 to 3-2 and then get to overtime in Game 6 and your goalie gives you 31 saves and your team throws 42 shots at the other net, now the ending has some shape. There's a story here. It's paying with architecture. The Penguins had enough to make this interesting. They just didn't have enough to finish it. That's the whole autopsy. Let's start with the obvious organ failure, the offense. 42 shots sounds like domination. Sounds like pressure. It sounds like you did enough to win a playoff game. And sure, Pittsburgh did a lot of things right. They pushed late in regulation. They had looks in overtime. Brian Rust had a close-range chance. Evgeny Malkin had a real opportunity from the slot. Tommy Novak hit the post, and Igor Chinnikov hit iron. There are moments where the puck was just sitting there, asking someone in a white jersey to become the reason Game 7 existed, but nobody did. The Penguins outshot the Flyers 42-32 and still lost 1-0. And yes, part of that is the goalie got hot. Dan Vladar was excellent. Full credit. He was the best player on the ice. He was the reason Philadelphia survived long enough for York to end it. But when you score 0 goals in an elimination game after falling behind 3-0 in the series, the conversation can't end at, their goalie was great. Great goalies, they're part of the playoffs. That's the job. You don't get to call the corner and say, we ran into a goalie. Everybody runs into a goalie. Somebody still has to score. Pittsburgh didn't. Philadelphia did. The power play didn't rescue Pittsburgh. The middle of the ice was too hard to access. The Flyers defended well enough to turn a lot of Pittsburgh's volume into survivable volume. As the game got later, the Penguins started to look like a team that could still produce effort, but not quite produce the last clean thing. That's the difference between pressure and a goal. Pressure makes the building nervous. A goal changes the series. Pittsburgh had pressure. Philadelphia got the goal. And that's what makes this one more interesting. Pittsburgh's goalie wasn't the problem. Artur Silovs did the job. He gave him a chance. He made the saves that keep an elimination game alive. He denied Matvei Mikov. He survived scrambles. Late in overtime, he even got help from his own discarded stick on a Porter Martone chance that looked like the season dying right there in front of them. That's the weird kind of playoff moment that becomes myth if your team wins. Because if Pittsburgh scores after that, we're talking about that stick save. We're talking about survival. And we're talking about Game 7. We're talking about the Penguins getting buried and then knocking from inside the coffin. Instead, it becomes a footnote because less than a minute later, Cam York gets the puck at the point, throws it through traffic. Noah Cates is in the front. It catches the post, and it's over. That's the official time of death. Game 6, overtime, 17 minutes, 32 seconds. Cam York. But the clinical time of death and the emotional time of death aren't always the same thing. The emotional time of death may have come much earlier, when Pittsburgh lost the first 3 games, leaving itself no margin at all. You can come back from 3-love, technically. 4 teams in NHL history have done it, technically. But mostly, a 3-love hole means you spend the rest of the series paying interest on your own mistakes. The Penguins did that. They made it noble. They made it dramatic. They made it uncomfortable for the Flyers, but they never really escaped the bill. The bill comes due. This is where we have to talk about the old core. Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang. There's no way to do a Penguins postmortem without saying those names, because those names are still the spine of the franchise. This season wasn't supposed to be some obvious late last dance masterpiece. A lot of people looked at Pittsburgh and saw age, decline, transition, maybe a team caught between 2 eras. And yet, they got back into the playoffs for the first time in 4 seasons. Crosby is still Crosby enough that every elimination has weight. Malkin is still himself enough that his future becomes a franchise question the moment the handshake line ends. Letang is still Letang enough that he can win playoff games and also look like a man dragging 20 years of mileage across the blue line. Together, the 3 of them remain one of the strangest things in modern sports. An old championship core that still refuses to become ceremonial. They weren't passengers here. Crosby had 5 points in the series. Malkin had moments. Letang scored big goals earlier in the series. These guys aren't team mascots. They're not nostalgic cameos. These guys are still central to Pittsburgh's success. And that's dangerous, because if your old gods are still your best argument, then the franchise isn't dead, but it's not free either. And that's the Penguins' problem now. So what survives? Crosby's credibility, that survives. That was never in danger, but it survives. Letang's pulse survives. The man still has moments where he looks like the entire concept of aging personally offends him. Malkin's emotional hold on the franchise survives, whether he comes back or not. That question is now the off-season cloud. Artur Silovs survives this autopsy clean. He didn't kill the patient. And the idea that Pittsburgh has one more relevant run left, that survives too, but just barely. Because this team wasn't a joke. They weren't filler. They didn't limp into the playoffs and politely vanish. They turned a 3-0 series into a 3-2 series and pushed Game 7 almost to a second overtime. But what doesn't survive is the illusion that this team has easy answers. Because if the conclusion is they're just one shot away, well, that sounds hopeful. And if the conclusion is they scored 4 total goals in their 4 losses and got shut out twice, that sounds a lot uglier. Both are true. But the truth is, the Penguins were close enough to hurt and flawed enough to deserve the ending. They didn't get enough from the power play. They didn't get enough finishing. They didn't turn shot volume into actual damage. Pardon me. Anthony Mantha's postseason drought becomes part of the story. The support scoring wasn't enough. The Flyers bent, but never broke. Pittsburgh never found the hammer. Meanwhile, Philadelphia moves on because Vladar was better than the moment required. York took the shot that everyone dreams about, and the Flyers survived the exact kind of game that can turn a series into a disaster. And that's both the Flyers' celebration and the Penguins' autopsy. Official ruling, the Penguins died of acute asphyxiation. The immediate cause was Cam York's overtime goal in Game 6. The underlying condition was a series-long inability to turn possession, pressure, and veteran desperation into actual goals. Contributing factors include the 3-0 series hole, a power play that didn't save him, Dan Vladar's 42-save shutout, and the hard reality that Pittsburgh's legendary core can still elevate a team, but can't magically solve every structural problem forever. Manner of death, painful. Respectable, Avoidable. And that last word is the one that lingers. Avoidable. Because this wasn't a hopeless team. They weren't dead. They didn't have nothing left to say. They had just enough left to make you believe. And then they had nothing left to finish the sentence. 42 shots, no pulse. I'll see you next time.